You're listening to the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. Today's episode is all about boundaries and authenticity. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast is your sanctuary for navigating these sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in-laws, while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered nearly 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Welcome to today's episode. I am really glad that you're here. I don't know if this is the first episode that you're listening to or the 60-somethingth one that you're listening to, but I just want to tell you thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day, out of your stressful life to tune in to this podcast episode. So today's topic is all about boundaries and authenticity. And the take I'm doing on this is looking at what your body is trying to tell you. Did you know that your body might be telling you something important about your relationship with your in-laws? Let's look deeper at this topic. So I have been listening to the audio version of a book by Dr. Gabor Mate called When the Body Says No. And he dives very deep for, I think the book is something like 16 hours long. He dives deep into this concept that our bodies will send us physical signals when something isn't right. And usually after it has sent us emotional signals that we have disregarded or ignored, or maybe just through lack of knowledge, just not paid attention to. And one of the reasons why I started listening to this book, number one, is because of an upcoming guest that's going to be on our podcast very soon. She shared with me this book because she is a functional health practitioner and recommended this because there is such a powerful link between the chronic stress in our lives and traumas that we have been through and physical manifestations of those things that have happened. I was brought up in a time and in a mindset that things that are in your head, they don't really do anything except bounce around in your head. That if you have a physical ailment, it's because something physical is going on. Really, it seems like only very recently that the science has caught up with the actual physical science. So the study of science, the study of these kind of things has just really pretty recently caught up with the idea that physical symptoms in your body, physical ailments, can be a sign of something that was not a physical trauma. So you can have issues that don't result from a car accident, that don't result from a injury that you got in high school, that don't result from a fall that you took as an infant. They can be as a result of some psychological trauma or stress in your life. So his book about how the body says no talks about how chronic stress from difficult relationships, and so from my perspective, difficult in-law relationships, can manifest in our bodies physically. And some of these ways include tension headaches, stomach issues, sleep problems, constant fatigue, hormone imbalances. And in his book, he even talks about the link to many different types of cancer, to chronic stress or childhood trauma. Now, these aren't just random symptoms. When something is going on in our bodies are trying to tell us something. And I know that that is a very different way of thinking about physical symptoms. And it's one that I've tried to adopt probably within the last 7 to 10 years, thinking about, okay, I've got a headache. What is my body trying to tell me? Am I overtired because I stayed up too late the night before? Am I dehydrated? Do I need to drink some water and maybe get some electrolytes? What is it? Maybe it's a very stressful situation that happened and my brain is just on overdrive. And it's really taking a very different approach for me to think about what kind of clues my body is sending and then trying to decipher those clues. Kind of like Nancy Drew, but on a whole different level. Thinking about the difference between authenticity and adaptation. Now, Dr. Mate's teaching on how we learn to suppress our authentic selves leads us to create some adaptations that can be unhealthy. So there might have been a childhood issue where we were conditioned to be nice, to keep the peace, and that doesn't leave us when we turn 18. Those behaviors are very much entrenched in our thought patterns and how we live. And so if you were a child that had a volatile family life and you knew that you needed to smile and be nice or do whatever you can to keep mommy and daddy happy, that carries on into adulthood. Maybe not in the exact same ways, but it does carry on. So there's a difference between a healthy adaptation to situations and harmful self suppression. So by being nice or keeping the peace because you didn't want to incur the wrath of a difficult parent, then that is a very difficult and maladaptive adaptation that you were kind of forced into as a child because of the situation that you were living in. And one of the things I really, really like about what Dr. Gabor Mate talks about is he says that oftentimes these symptoms that show up, maybe it's addiction, maybe it's this suppression of your own feelings to be nice or to try to keep the peace or whatever it is. ADHD, he said, is often a sign of some childhood trauma. He says that whatever it is, whether it's the addiction, whether it's the people pleasing, whatever it is, that is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. So he says, he's very clear. He's like, there's nothing wrong with you. And for those of us who have certain diagnoses, it feels better to know that there's nothing wrong with us. What happened is that we have a body and a mind that reacted in a certain way that was a normal reaction to some abnormal situations. So if we are constantly adapting to our in-laws' expectations that we don't necessarily agree with, that we don't want to go along with, that we feel like we have to sacrifice ourselves, we can't be authentic to who we are because of their expectations, well, that disconnects us from who we truly are. If you're constantly having to, let's say, host gatherings at your house and you are super introverted and you do not enjoy having company over, maybe that's not one of your gifts. You don't have the gift of hospitality. And yet you're put in that situation because for your in-laws, it is an expectation that they will be catered to at somebody else's house. Then that means that you cannot be your authentic self in your own home with your own family. And I hope that you can see and understand that that's probably not very healthy. And because of that, it incurs a certain amount of stress on you, mental and emotional. And then when you don't pay attention to those mental and emotional stressors, it becomes physical. And that's what I very much experienced through the latter years of the time that we were in contact with my in-laws. In the beginning, it was just kind of annoyances and just kind of head-scratching, strange experiences that I didn't quite understand, but were uncomfortable. And I knew from pretty early on that I couldn't necessarily say what I thought without repercussions. Even if I was being totally innocent in comments that I made, if it didn't go along with a certain narrative that was expected, then there were repercussions. And it wasn't even like obvious repercussions. It was gossip behind my back. And so I carried that from the time I was 21 years old. That's how old I was when I got married. And of course, I met my in-laws before that. And so for very formative young adult years, I was under intense scrutiny. Sometimes I didn't even know it. And over time, that scrutiny builds up and gets greater and greater. And the level of intensity increased because now there's children in the picture. And maybe I start putting boundaries in place that my in-laws don't like. And then there's more repercussions and temper tantrums. And that started to manifest in physical ways. So that's just about me and about us as adults on the receiving end of some stressful, overwhelming, tension-filled relationships with our in-laws. But what about the impact on our children? Well, Dr. Mate's research on children shows that they absorb the stresses of their parents. Children sense emotional tension even when we think we are hiding it. And my own children, unfortunately, are an example of that. Our youngest daughter, I reference her example a lot because I had no idea. But at 19 years old, she told me in the interview that I did for this podcast that she never recalled it not being tense around her grandparents. Never. Never in her life. When she was about a year old, we got out of the military life and we moved about an hour away from my in-laws. So her very earliest memories that she has involved her grandparents because we were so close by and we saw them a lot. She cannot look back on her life of almost 20 years and think of any time that her grandparents were involved that there wasn't a certain level of tension. And I have to reiterate, if you have not listened to other episodes where I talk about this tension, we tried to hide it. We did not badmouth my in-laws ever with my children. Never, ever. We tried to hide the tension. We tried to hide the stress. But children are very perceptive. People will play things off and they'll say, oh, but children are so resilient. Well, not necessarily. Children carry these things. And this tension has affected not only my youngest daughter, but all of my kids. Hi, Miriam Susan here. I wanted to point out a new feature for you to reach out with any questions that you might have. It is an audio message submission option on my website, desiringpeace.com/podcast. If you have any questions, if you just want to reach out, if you just want to tell me, hey, thank you, I really appreciated this episode, I would absolutely love to hear from you. If you decide to submit a question, it could be chosen to be played here on the podcast or for me to just answer it if it makes more sense for me to just address your question without playing your audio. But I will be in touch if you reach out. Just send me a quick note. Go to desiringpeace.com/podcast. Submit your audio message now. There's this concept called attachment disruption where you as a mom are emotionally unavailable. Why? Because of the stress of dealing with your in-laws. And I 100% know that that applies to some of my years parenting my children, especially the years when we were living just an hour away from my in-laws. The stress of living so close to them was nearly unbearable. And for my poor children, they are the ones that probably suffered the most because they couldn't understand what was going on. We weren't talking about it in front of them. And so they just knew mommy changes when our grandparents are around. Mommy is not feeling well. Mommy is stressed a lot. Maybe mommy is more angry and frustrated and has a shorter temper because of all the stress. And so this stress, although we tried to hide it, it resulted in this attachment disruption because I was so overcome with the stress that I could not be the mom I needed to be for my very young children. And we have to remember that whenever something traumatic, whenever something stressful is happening, children will often blame themselves for family tension if they don't understand what is going on. And most of the time, the children are not going to understand what is going on because we barely understand what is going on. So that's a huge burden for our young children to carry. Children learn from what we model more than what we say. I think all of us can think of an example of maybe somebody you knew or maybe your own parents who talked about how bad it is to get drunk and how important it is to be mindful of how much you consume when it comes to alcohol. But yet, then you see your parents getting drunk at gatherings or just on a regular Friday night. So we as children watch and we learn. And we know children are very perceptive, and they know when we're blowing smoke. They know that if we are saying one thing, they're going to believe a whole lot more what we model, how we live, how we do things. If we say that God is important and yet we never go to Mass on Sundays, if we always find an excuse to do something else, they get it. They see, well, I guess this whole faith thing, this whole God thing is not that big a deal. Yeah, mom and dad say that going to Mass is important, but they never go. So it's very important to understand that when we model allowing our in-laws to just plow through or completely ignore and disregard our boundaries, our kids are watching and they see what we're modeling. And we're telling them in no words, but just our actions, that it's okay to let somebody take advantage of you if they're family. And that's not right. There is a connection between parental authenticity, us being authentic parents to our children, and our children's emotional security. If we can be authentic with our kids and let them know things are kind of rough between your grandparents, it's not a matter of bad-mouthing the grandparents. You can let your kids know that you have a difficult relationship with their grandparents without bad-mouthing their grandparents. You can let them know because they know it anyway. They might not have the words, but they know it anyway because they can sense the stress and tension. And so even just letting them know authentically that things are difficult, I think that's better for our kids because then they can have something that makes sense. Okay, so mommy is stressed because of this. Daddy is overwhelmed because of this. Hiding it does not do our kids any favor. So a scripture I would like to reference is from Psalm 139, verses 13 through 14. And you probably know this one very well. For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. How does this tie into all of this? Well, God created us, our authentic selves, with intention. We are no accident. Our children are not accidents. And God created us to be a certain way, to be in the world a certain way, to serve some purpose in His overall plan for the world. And when we deny that, when we ignore that to adapt to whatever it is our in-laws want or anybody else, then we are not being and honoring our true selves and honoring how God created us. Now, this is, of course, within God's design. If you start sinning and you start going outside of His design, then obviously that is not how God created you to be. So I need to make sure to clarify that. When we are our true authentic selves as God created us, that to me is how we bring honor and glory to God. What about our husbands? There's almost like an attachment trap that our husbands are in. How your husband's attachment patterns with his parents are affects your marriage. When you say yes, when you mean no, it creates an internal conflict. So if your husband has an enmeshed toxic relationship with his parents, it absolutely is going to affect your marriage because he is going to be living as if he were an extension of his parents. And he cannot be the husband and father that his vocation calls him to be if he is still in that enmeshed type relationship. And so when he kind of pulls you into that because you are married, you then become an extension of your in-laws. And then when you start saying yes to things that you don't want to say yes to, I think you understand what happens because you've probably done that many, many, many times. It does. It creates this internal conflict because you can't be your authentic self. You have to hide and morph, bury whoever you are so that you can be the daughter-in-law that your in-laws expect you to be, or you suffer the consequences of not being who they expect you to be. Now, these generational patterns keep unhealthy dynamics in place. Chances are the dynamics that you're seeing between your family and your in-laws, they've been going on before. they've probably been going on for multiple generations. Maybe not, but history like that tends to repeat itself, and we tend to repeat the patterns that we were modeled growing up. So pleasing others at your own expense isn't loving. Now, whether your husband sees that or not, well, it just makes it that more difficult if he doesn't. And so I would encourage you, before anything else, to pray for your husband, because he has to get to the point where he can see that he is not an extension of his parents, but he is his own autonomous self. And that as a husband, when he entered into marriage, he is supposed to leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. That means he's not an extension of mom and dad anymore. And then his role begins as husband, not as a child, but as a husband, and possibly one day a father. So when he is so consumed with pleasing his parents, it comes at his own expense. He can't be who God designed him to be, who God created him to be. And that isn't being loving towards his parents. It is not loving to morph and change who you are just to please another person. That's inauthentic. That's just conforming to what I would say is a sinful desire of somebody else, because I don't think it is loving for you to demand another person to conform to be the way they want you to be if that's not what you really want to do. So it's very important to think about reclaiming your authentic self. And how do we do that? It has to be through setting boundaries and enforcing them. Boundaries are the key that we need to maintain our own sense of self, to maintain our human dignity as God created us. There is a definite connection between being authentic and our spiritual wholeness. If we are living a lie, if we are looking and acting and trying to be somebody just to try to please our in-laws, that is not what God wants for us. Yes, we can do things that please our in-laws, but if our whole lives are encompassed in doing only that, that is not a way to be who we are. We have to remember that setting boundaries is not selfish. Setting boundaries is a way of saying, this is where I end and this is where you begin. Boundaries do not allow for enmeshment, because enmeshment means that you and I are one. There's blurred lines between where your family ends and your in-laws' family begins. It's just one big family, and that's not the way that our families are designed to be. So what's another way to get back to who our authentic self is? Well, we need to listen to our bodies. Listen to the wisdom of our bodies to reconnect with our true selves. Part of the book that Dr. Gabor Mate wrote, When the Body Says No, he talks about the gut reactions, and he talks about the literal gut inside our bodies reaction to stressors. If you feel it in your gut, a pain, a discomfort, when you're around your in-laws, pay attention, get curious. Start to think, why is this happening? Why am I having a physical reaction when I'm around these people? If you deal with things like I did, like adrenal fatigue, adrenal crashes, every time I see my in-laws, that should have clued me in. I was not paying attention. For years, I was not paying attention. I knew that I would get butterflies and kind of an uneasy, unsettled feeling in my gut when we had to see my in-laws, but I didn't put the pieces together. So I'm hoping that this episode will clue you into these things so that you can become aware of them, so that you can pay attention and get curious with what's going on inside your body physically and try to figure out, is this stress from being around my in-laws? So we have to take small steps towards awareness that can honor both ourselves without being selfish and honor our relationships. Those small steps can be paying attention to any physical symptoms that you notice patterns of in regards to seeing your in-laws. Do you experience gut issues? Do you experience fatigue? Do you experience headaches? Do you experience your blood pressure going up? Do you feel sleepless? Do you feel anxious? What are the clues that your body is giving you that something is not quite right with this relationship? And get curious. Start reading up. Listen to or read this book. It's probably a pretty thick book if it goes on for 16 hours, but it's got really, really solid, science-backed, research-backed information on how stress can show up in our bodies. Just small steps that you can take. Pay attention to those little things that happen because I didn't. And I don't want you to end up in the situation that I was in and I currently am in, trying to heal from so many years of chronic stress. So I'd like to close out by posing this simple question. What is your body trying to tell you about your boundaries? Healing and finding a sense of peace begins with awareness. So pay attention to those little clues that you're getting and let me know. Let me know what you figure out. Let me know what you notice when you are around your in-laws. And then get curious and start digging and thinking and praying about what is going on. What is my body trying to tell me? How is my body telling me that I'm not being authentic to the woman that God created me to be? God bless you. Go in peace. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you've ever wondered just how toxic your relationship with your in-laws really is, I've got the perfect tool for you. Introducing the new free Toxic In-Laws Assessment, a self-graded quiz designed to help you identify the true level of toxicity in your relationship with your in-laws. Whether you're unsure if your in-laws are really that bad or you think they might be worse than you realize, this assessment will give you the clarity you need. Don't leave it to guesswork. Take the free Toxic In-Laws Assessment now and start your journey towards healthier and more peaceful family dynamics. Visit desiringpeace.com/quiz to get started. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and/or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.